This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend. I've walked your snow-capped mountains that tower to the sky and cast a reflection on the wall.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is May 29th, 2025.
I'm Scott Loneboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the BC Legislature has risen, but the House of Commons has returned, so there's still lots of politics happening. I don't know if I remember it happening where one stops working right as the other starts. It's not like there's anything BC needs to respond to still. Keep up with all the politics conversation at our Slack channel. Join by becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/politicos. So let's get into it on the BC side to start. The big press release is out. The legislature is done. The Lieutenant Governor has signed royal assent to, I think, about 15 bills. As the government is wont to do, they put out their press release patting themselves on the back for standing up for a strong BC growing economy. I don't know. What did you make of it?
The press release itself, I mean, it's the most boilerplate. Let's pat ourselves on the back. I mean, this was a somewhat interesting session in just that it's actually the first time to remember the NDP's really struggled on some legislation and faced some pretty serious blowback and pushed through it all.
Yeah, I'm going through the list of what they passed, and because I couldn't remember, and there's the standard stuff like the budget, some updates that they had to do, like appointing a conflict of interest commissioner was one of the first things, some minor updates here and there, with really the big substantive controversial stuff coming right in the last few weeks, with bills 14 and 15 being introduced on April 30th and May 1st, respectively, and we'll come back to those. Like, for all the talk they had, actually, they didn't really have much talk in the election about what they wanted to do, and that's why we're kind of in this situation. But there was this kind of, BC's going to stand up to Trump and make sure Canada is, and British Columbia in particular, is building things and getting on with stuff. And for most of this, it does not give that vibe. It's a lot of like procedural cleanup stuff where maybe the big stuff is coming.
Yeah, although this is also the time in the year where you have to do estimates, and that's just consumed several weeks of legislature time.
What an awful, there's got to be a better way to make use of the meeting structures and times they have than just like sitting and yelling about numbers for hours on end. They did actually improve something this year in allowing members' bills to have an order of precedence and start to come forward. And we did see 2 private members' bills pass, which is like 2 of the 4 private members' bills that have ever passed in British Columbia happened this spring. And one from each party, one from the NDP and one from the Conservatives. The NDP bill, the Eligibility to Hold Public Office Act, passed today. That means that the MLAs who are double dipping, who are still serving as locally elected politicians, either as city councillor, mayor, school trustee, regional district representative, they're all less employed today than they were yesterday as of royal assent of that bill. Specifically, Misty Van Popta is no longer a councillor for the township of Langley, and Corky Neufeld is no longer a school trustee in Abbotsford. Everyone else had resigned.
So a couple local by-elections will be coming on that. Seems a little silly that this needed to be a law, but yes, it does. Might as well make it clear.
Yeah, it's something that had been established between federal and provincial parliaments quite a while ago, but it wasn't always the case. In early Canadian history, you had people who were MLAs and MPs at the same time. I think Amor de Cosmos was.
That must have been a hell of a commute going back and forth between Victoria and Ottawa.
Right? There were no virtual or even telephone options then.
It would be enough if you were just doing it up by plane, but having to spend, would it be like a week on a train every time you need to go from one to the other?
I do appreciate that our trains aren't any faster 150 years later. They're actually slower, I believe. I've seen some reporting because the freight takes priority. The bill's fine. It's pretty good. Yeah, I agree. Shouldn't have been necessary, but people have tried to bring it in a few times over like the past 30 years. So here we are.
Oh, yeah, just one other thought on that. So part of the argument for staying on is a lot of these smaller towns are considered a part-time job. And I've even heard that said for like City of Vancouver councillors and stuff. And it would probably be good at some point to actually have a real discussion and debate about whether those are in fact part-time jobs or if they actually should come with more both responsibilities and a full-time salary to go with it. Particularly for Langley. Like, we're not talking some like town in the middle of the province with 500 people in it.
Yeah, this is 150,000 people in that community. And the Abbotsford School Board is a pretty big school board, but few school board trustee positions are full-time jobs. I think there is a broader argument of like the kind of, like, it's not an overt conflict of interest necessarily, but there might be a couple instances like this bill that neither Misty or Corky could vote on because it did directly affect their pecuniary interests of a salary. But like you get a kind of divided loyalty when you're trying to represent, like a school trustee is going to be lobbying for more school funding, but then as an MLA might want to balance other funding priorities, right? So as an elected official, I think it makes sense to just have one focus and like run for the other thing, like many trustees did, Christine Boyle, a dozen others, but then you resign. So the other private member's bill that passed was from Conservative Judy Tour. It was a perinatal and postnatal mental health strategy. I think this was the only bill to get unanimous consent in the legislature. I think that was at first reading. There may have been one or two amendments made just to improve it, but largely it is a bill just to tell the government to develop a strategy to support mental health of people who are pregnant and have just given birth.
Seems good.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. Having known people who've given birth, mental health can be a challenge because it's traumatic, even when it goes well. So let's support those people. Yeah, good. Like, it's a real good sign for our legislature. I don't want to be too like rosy optimistic, but like in theory, that's how the legislature should work, is when there's a good idea, everyone can come together and get behind it and pass it. And it's nice to see that come through, where like the NDP's motion or Darlene Rochford's motion was clearly targeting specific Conservative MLAs. And they were able to play that as a bit of a thing. The Conservatives did have their own bills that were a little bit more partisan, like the we're going to repeal the industrial carbon tax bill, but no.
Yeah, we also had the one from Eleanor Sturko the other week that got pulled the other week, basically because the NDP decided or worked out an arrangement where they would more or less take that on as a government bill. So yeah, it does seem to be something that's leading to a little more cooperation, or not just this is just a method to ratify what cabinet wants to do.
So that's positive. The less positive element of this session was right at the end with the two bills we've talked about, Bills 14 and 15.
Well, we actually just skipped over 7, which turned out to be a pretty significant part of the session. I don't really have much of a recap on that beyond... I don't think it was the first time the NDP really had to back down from a major piece of legislation because of blowback.
Yeah,
on it.
This was the tariff response bill they introduced, which included some, minor things like giving the government the ability to toll trucks that were going from Washington State to Alaska and just like cutting through BC. as a way to discourage them or respond to it. But then also let cabinet do anything it wants to any law if it deems it necessary. Mm-hmm. People didn't like that. So
yeah, that one was a little overly broad. We'll get to the other two controversial ones in a bit, but those had the benefit of being more focused rather than we're just uploading most of the stuff to cabinet, which, yeah, understandably drew a lot of blowback.
And they did walk that one back. They did walk back the let us change all of the laws by fiat provision, which was nice to see. And it managed to pass fairly quietly after that. They did repeal the carbon tax officially as well. That one went through pretty quick. That went through in a day. Actually, that one they had to push through, I remember, because they were late on introducing it, and then the Conservatives tried to filibuster it to really screw them over for April 1st. Some weird choices this legislative session. But I think we need to talk about Bills 14 and 15, because I do want to spend a little bit more time on those, and then we have to spend time on the throne speech federally, obviously. We've talked a bit about 14 and 15, the Renewable Energy Project Streamline Permitting Act and the Infrastructure Projects Act. So 14, they ended up being equally controversial, but 14 was we're going to pick a number of high priority green energy projects and transmission lines, as well as create the ability to fast track wind and solar projects as we deem them necessary, which seems broadly good. Give all of that regulatory authority into the BC Energy Regulator.
Yeah, it seems hard to argue with that one.
The Greens,
and yet,
the Greens had some arguments that they don't trust the BCER because its previous role was just the oil and gas regulator, and they viewed it as an industry captured regulator that didn't always work in the public benefit. So I think they had an angle there where they said, we don't trust that environmental reviews will still be as robust through this process as the government is claiming they will be. It is kind of the argument about, like, on a net good, does this work out? But
yeah, that seems to be they're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good on that one. That's been a problem with a lot of environmentally focused organizations, that they've been real hesitant to do anything that removes roadblocks, even if it is for things that will have a lot of benefit for the environment if it becomes easier to build them.
So that one came down to a tied vote in the end, with the Speaker having to vote in favor of the bill because the government deemed it to be a confidence bill. And Bill 15, the Infrastructure Projects Act from Bowen Ma, was the other one that let the government basically deem projects of provincial priority and in the broad interest to get accelerated and streamline them. Puts a lot of power in Cabinet's hands and regulations that are yet to come. An interesting thing happened earlier this week where the government Bowen Ma actually tried to introduce an amendment to meet some of the criticisms, to say we will have to explain this in regulations. And that amendment failed because the Greens teamed up with the Conservatives to say, we just don't like this bill. And because it was a tie vote at committee, the Speaker had to vote against it to maintain the status quo.
So the bill has fewer of the safeguards that people who were critical of it wanted.
Yes.
Because the opposition wouldn't go for adding them. That's just amazing work on their part.
Yeah. The Greens did give the government the heads up about this, as far as I could tell. So it was a known stumble, but it came to third reading and again had a tie vote, with the Speaker having to break that because, again, a confidence motion. If this had failed, we'd be in an election over this, which would just be embarrassing for everyone involved. It's law now.
I'm sure the Conservatives would love it.
They would think they'd love it. We could have a broader...
I mean, elections are always uncertain, so yeah, there's risks and benefits to it, but you could do a lot worse than simultaneously be going into an election on an issue that divides the other side's coalition, and at the same time undercut the splinter group of independent MLAs before they manage to get it together to file for an actual party registration, which would basically give them a fighting chance of holding on to their seats. Because we've all seen how utterly ineffective an independent run is.
Especially provincially.
Yeah, especially provincially, I mean, federally too. So yeah, like the Conservatives would have a lot of upside to going into an election at this point. Plus, there's some other parent disunity in the ranks, and nothing unifies a team like having to fight an election.
It is worth remembering that like the ballot question wouldn't be necessarily around Bill 15 because the vote that triggers the election can be forgotten real quick, as the opposition federally learned in 2011 when it was a vote of contempt, I think, for the government withholding certain documents that triggered an election. But that didn't matter in the debate itself. It was all about strong, stable majority government. And that might be the question that comes up. And if British Columbians are looking at American threats, and you have Conservatives who seem unsure about where they stand on it, and David Eby doing his, we're going to push projects through and build a strong BC, it could unify some of those soft greens behind him the way Carney picked up everyone else federally. So it's definitely an uncertain thing. I don't want an election right now. We've done enough in the past. And we have
I feel a little electioned out, to be honest.
We have the municipal ones next year. Let's look forward to those. So the other parliamentary glitch, I guess, that came up in these two debates, I forget which bill it was, is after the vote, the Conservatives brought up a complaint that NDP MLA Rick Glumac he had zoomed in. He was on the virtual vote, and he had a blurred background. And apparently the rules for virtual participation prevent you from having a virtual background. Like, I don't know, you can't pretend to be on the beach. We have to see your office for whatever reason. And they argued a blurry background constituted a virtual one, so they needed the speaker to rule on this and possibly disqualify his vote, which would have possibly defeated the bill or at least forced a revote. Speaker ruled against it, against the complaint anyway. But procedural shenanigans abound.
If there is a rule on that does actually seem like a fair thing to raise.
Yeah, and I get, like, if you're the opposition, it actually shows some talent to rule monger like that, like test it. Like, it would be dumb if they were out on the lawn being like, that was a rigged vote because he had, like, no one cares in the reality of it. But in terms of the in-the-house procedures, clever enough.
Yeah, also, like, if you're a government MLA on a vote that is going to come down to the wire, why aren't you making sure you have everything squared away? Like, no, just don't do dumb stuff that invites the shenanigans.
Well, I think this was in yesterday's debates, but on today's, the speaker did point out that I don't see any blurred backgrounds today at one point. So I think it was an open question. Like, I would not consider a blurred background to be a virtual background. I guess it depends what the actual words I guess it'd be in the standing orders or whatever their policy on virtual participation is. Sure is convenient for the government that they still have that virtual options, given how close everything is. Means their MLAs can still be in community while participating in ledge debates. So I guess from here we have to see how these bills go. There's still a lot of opposition to both bills. I think if they had just done Bill 14, they might have gotten away, but because they put them together, the extra Indigenous and environmental anger at Bill 15 has spilled over onto Bill 14 as well. And a lot of groups are mad at both of them.
Yeah, I suspect Bill 14 would have had an easier ride if 15 hadn't immediately followed it.
The thing I keep coming back to is if they can get shovels in the ground for a few high-profile popular projects using these bills, the, principled just arguments against them, which I'll still stand behind, will land less strongly, frankly. Like the Olympic Village school is a prominent one that feels likely to go ahead because the government's been talking about that for, I think Justin McElroy pointed out, 23 years, or at least it has been generally talked about.
Yeah, so when the area first started getting planned and lead up to the Olympics, that school was talked about and considered there. The provincial government dragged their feet for a long time. I think they finally committed to it in something like 2020. A lot of blame on the province on that one, but that was 5 years ago now, and it just, God knows, it's going to have to go through another rezoning in the city of Vancouver because the design came in, was it 5 meters or something taller than it was originally done.
But the shadows, Scott, the shadows from that school.
Who gives a crap about that? And because Vancouver does this really dumb thing of writing a bespoke zoning bylaw for every new development, which is, basically a way to pad out the work for the planning department rather than actually create like a good city or good process. Stuff has to come back whenever they, are off by a foot or two, or, somebody wants to add an internal mezzanine or put a pet store in because someone forgot to include that in the list of permitted uses when they were first writing a bylaw. They should just like preempt the city on this one and use that as their first instance of, we're just going to get this thing built come hell or high water.
It'll be hard to argue against that. I mean, the city of Vancouver might. I even suspect they might not.
Screw them.
Yeah.
At that point.
Oh, no, I agree. It's also weird that it's 5 meters. Like, that sounds trivial, but that's like a floor and a half. It's like, how do you accidentally add 5 meters of height to, like, schools aren't usually that big, right? They're only 1 or 2 stories. So something.
You'll sometimes get a bit taller in like some of the center of the city school.
Anyway.
Because they have to make do with smaller footprints.
Yeah. So, like, the province, the NDP have talked about using Bill 15 for schools, hospitals, public facilities like that. How they tie themselves in regulations, how they tie their hands there, that will matter. And like I said, if Olympic Village School gets going and a few more, we'll forget about how controversial this was. It's still bad tools, I think. Still not the best way to put the tools in your hands.
If these are the sorts of things that it makes sense to take a different approach to when it's a high priority, that just invites the question of, is it actually necessary in the first place, or have you just clogged up the system with a whole bunch of regulations that benefits do not outweigh their costs, that are providing like very marginal improvements of public benefits, and basically creating just a whole bunch of extra red tape and bureaucracy that's not really serving anything. It's maybe the opponents of whatever project it is, whether it's, who knows what.
I don't think
housing.
It would have solved the issues with the bill, but it would have been a sign of good faith if they had sunset clauses to be, we need Bill 15 while we work on the, cleanup bills, because there's a lot of different red tapes we want to clean up, not hack everything.
Have they actually come out and talked about wanting to do cleanup bills and clean up a bunch of the stuff, or is this like we don't really want to do the hard work of taking that stuff out, so we'll give us an escape clause on it?
Honestly, I don't know. I might be projecting what I think they should do rather than what they are doing at this point.
It's ideally what they should do. Yeah, or if they'd been able to... I also think this would have gone better if they'd pointed to a few things they wanted to use it on in much clearer ways.
Bill 14 did that. Bill 14 names 3 projects.
Yeah, they should have named the Olympic Village School. I don't quite know if this would qualify as infrastructure, so they might have had to do it a little differently. But rebuilding of the village of Lytton, which it's nearly 4 years since that town burned down. They've built 11 homes since then. In nearly 4 years, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on having to do a bunch of archaeological work rather than prioritizing rebuilding. If there was ever a case of we just had a big disaster, we have an urgent need to get something built, it was that. And the province was just asleep at the switch on it, just did not care or wasn't willing to put in place measures to do it. But they should have, and if they needed an act like this to get that done, that would have been good.
So I guess we'll keep our eye on what projects get fast-tracked, and whether that ends up being, as a friend of the pod, Stuart Press, described it, just a series of rakes that have been laid out for the province to just step on, because now they are taking political ownership of every project that gets fast-tracked, and not just broadly making the processes more efficient.
Fair. Even though making the process more efficient should be option 1 on it, I do think there's something to be said for there should just be a more direct level of political accountability. People want governments to be able to actually do the things they campaign on, and put it in a platform a year and a half later, making an announcement about it, and then it just doesn't happen before the next election because it's winding its way through an incredibly cumbersome process, is not the sort of thing that is particularly good or gives that direct democratic dissent, attempt to implement it, yay or nay from the voters afterwards on whether or not it's working. There should be a more direct relationship between that. And particularly in Canada, we have a really bad tendency to confuse the announcement for the actual deliverable as opposed to the project being completed and being in use.
Canada's Economic Action Plan signs. I'm having flashbacks.
Yeah, or
they're not the only government to put them up, but those were the first prominent ones that I think of.
Or even stuff like the high-speed rail, where they've been making high-speed rail announcements or high-frequency rail announcements for years, and they are still a long time away from actually building anything, but they're happy to pat themselves on the back for the work they're doing on that. Anyway, you shouldn't get credit until the thing's done.
Fair.
Or at least shovels in the ground on it.
Well, speaking of shooting your mouth off and... I don't know, I'm trying to transition here. There's an interesting thing while we're talking about the legislature. It happened a few weeks ago. There was some series of debates, and Conservative MLA Harman Bangu was talking in the legislature about Teamsters Local 213 that he was previously a member of, and he accused them, quote, of blatant corruption and systemic nepotism. That's allowed. I mean, it's going to get some eyebrows raised because you have
do anything on the floor.
Yep. But then he took the video, shared it on his social media, and kind of repeated it. And the parliamentary practice guides and manuals do point out that parliamentary privilege doesn't necessarily extend to you republishing the things you said on the floor, even if it's the official video. He has since deleted all those posts, but he's now being sued for libel and defamation for sharing those posts by the union. So I'll be interested to see how far this goes.
I could definitely see an argument where, if the original thing's protected, is it really all that different to share it? Because that is, at that point, a matter of the public record in Hansard and the official recording. I don't know how fine a distinction can be drawn on that's going to be an interesting question.
It also depends what he captioned the video with. Some of this has been litigated before, which is why, but I don't have those in front of me. But I do know some of the guides are like, you're not guaranteed parliamentary privilege if you repeat the same things out of the House, even republish some of the records. Notably as well, Bangu asked that these comments be struck from Hansard. So he knew he fucked up at the time and didn't want it on the formal record. So it's weird he posted them.
Yeah, that's a little odd.
So anyway, interesting debate, and we'll see.
Keep an eye on.
Yeah, he might just settle. But all right, from defamation on the floor to allegations about the election. Elections BC has its official report about elections 2024 out. The broad takeaway is we had a free and fair election. We wouldn't normally comment on the provincial election report because it's a pretty dry, how did things go document that talks about how many people voted, how did they run the systems, what threats did they face, and all of that's pretty standard as you'd expect. The prominent thing in here is this includes a bit of their review of that ballot box that went missing for a few days and what happened there and how are they going to fix that. What happened there was human error, as we were told at the time, and they've kind of held on to. Like, they do say they went through as much as they can. More specifically, they also lacked a few quality assurance measures that they were planning to put into place, like comparing the number of votes cast to the number of people who came in the door to vote, which seems like a pretty good way to...
Yeah, that seems like an obvious sanity check to do.
Yeah,
everything.
I think they were close. They were just like a few weeks short of having that ready.
Which it wasn't like the election caught anyone by surprise. How was that not prepped ahead of time? Like, I totally get it for snap elections. You're going to be caught before you have a chance to implement things. But this was an election that was known for 4 years. How do you not have that everything done on the we're going to update stuff well ahead of that? Or at least, a month ahead of when the writ was expected to be drawn up?
I don't know, Scott. Read the full report. We've only skimmed parts of it. Like, there were a lot of changes that happened between 2020 and 24, right? We introduced the tabulators, we expanded the vote anywhere options, and 2020 was also a notably distinct election for the middle of COVID and the high number of advance and mail-in ballots. And so there were a lot of things they were probably working on. It's not to excuse it. They do have a small section on how to prevent ballot boxes from going missing in the future with 3 easy steps, which are automated results reporting. They'll have more tech wherever they can to basically compare data about how many people have voted. And the tabulators themselves won't be connected to the internet, but they will be able to track registrations through a central database to see and keep some of those numbers better accounted for. They'll improve their quality assurance process. That's kind of like I was speaking about, making sure they have different checks to make sure that the number of ballots being counted is how many should be counted and that any aren't missing. And training people better. Look at teaching people about additional quality assurance steps, possibly add an additional day for quality assurance just to make sure that during the final count that they have done everything they can to feel confident about this, and build in as many redundancies as you can to make sure you don't miss anything.
So this all seems like a great way to identify when you have misplaced the ballot box, but it doesn't sound like any of those are how do you not misplace it in the first place? How do you have a more controlled chain of custody on that thing the whole time? Like, that really seems to be the missing part of what we're thinking of doing about this.
I think part of that is the training element, making sure that everything is nice and clear, because one of the challenges with an election is you need to hire a lot of people for a very short amount of time, but you need to have them be incredibly competent. Like, obviously, there's different levels, and the returning officers at each poll will be more experienced than that person who says hi at the door, right? Or takes your name down. But making sure at every step of that process that people understand what they have to do and not take the ballot box home, Scott. Like, it happened once, which is one time too many, but is not like a widespread failing of the system. It's
and even in that case, there was a provision in the procedures on that for what to do on like remote areas where you can't get to the district office that day with it. So it wasn't even like there was something particularly terrible about that being in the custody of, I think it was the returning officer, the district officer for that. It was more that then didn't immediately show up as soon as it was available to get counted. That it was the extended period on that. And yeah, these chats will help catch that, but surely there would be some better procedure that could be implemented that is hey, this ballot box is signed out to this person at this date. It was expected to be here at this time. Where is it? Basically, I'm asking, like, where's the bot-specific tracking on all of this? That sure seems like there should be something added for that.
Indeed. Conscious of time, we've been recording for about 40 minutes, so we still have the throne speech to get through. The last thing provincially I want to touch on is an announcement today about the housing targets. The government is patting themselves on the back for delivering 16,000 homes in those communities that have been named as having to meet insufficient targets, most of whom aren't even meeting their targets, which are 75% of their housing need. But more towns are getting added to the list as well.
70% of the very lowball estimate of their housing need.
Yep. It's all fine. Anyway, good luck to Burnaby, Coquitlam, Courtenay, Township of Langley, Langford, Penticton, Pitt Meadows, Richmond, Squamish, and Vernon, who will soon have housing targets to meet. It's interesting, they got quotes from Mike Hurley, Mayor of Burnaby, in there saying, we're doing great, and look forward to continuing to build housing. I'm sure Coquitlam Mayor Richard Stewart will be mad like they are at everything the province has done on housing. Anyway, we've talked about these targets in the past. They're better than nothing, maybe, but
yeah, the whole thing has a bit of a conceptual flaw on we're going to do these like targets slowly rolled out. We're not going to, actually pay them to the amount that's needed.
And we saw even where they're horribly failing in West Van and Oak Bay, the remedial actions are slow and drawn out. Like, they've only just been told that by the end of this year, they have to pass upzoning bylaws.
Yeah. And right now they're in you have 30 days to write us a letter about this phase, which, like, as long as we're cutting through red tape and getting stuff going, like, let's see a little bit of that from the housing side too.
Hey, BC was
we
still
should have adopted the Japanese model.
BC was still
all I'm saying.
Just rated one of the best provinces on housing by an independent scorecard. So
yeah, that was a C though. So like
C plus.
That C plus is still a C. Like it's not something that the province should be proud of on that.
From the province to the federal government, it has returned with the King of Canada sitting in the Senate. He didn't wear his crown. I was most disappointed by that. If we're going to have a king do a throne speech, put the fancy hat on for Pete's sake. But anyway, Charles opened the House of Commons, or the Parliament, for 2025 with the throne speech, with Mark Carney sitting awkwardly in what many on the internet described as a cuck chair. And that's very 2025. I appreciate it. I don't know.
Yeah, They ought to find a better spot for the Prime Minister to sit on this.
It's so awkward.
It looks so awkward. And Mark Carney doesn't have like the best posture either. He was like kind of hunching forward on a lot of the clips.
What do you do with your body if you have to sit in just like a chair looking at a king for 30 minutes, listening to words you wrote or your friend, your staff wrote? It's a weird thing. People liked it, I think, for the most part. Like,
yeah, it was like well done, well received. Having the king come definitely added a lot of attention to it. Yeah, all that was well done. Every government tries to make throne speeches interesting, and they aren't. But this is like as good an attempt as you can get on it, and having Charles there at least made it so that they got like special coverage more than it would have otherwise if it was just Mary Simons up there reading.
I will say not everyone liked it, right? The Bloc Québécois, Yves-François Blanchet, called him a foreign king sitting and introducing it, and they boycotted the throne speech. And the Quebec National Assembly, just as Charles and Camilla were on the plane back to London, unanimously passed a resolution, just a motion calling on Canada to become a republic and ditch the monarchy.
Yeah, if they didn't like the monarchy, they shouldn't have lost the 7 Years' War.
They could still complain about it. That's democracy. I just appreciated that it was unanimous. Even the Quebec Liberals got on side with that. I mean, they have nothing to lose. It's Quebec. No one's a big monarchist fan there. Yeah, I'm not, so I thought that was funny. But let's talk about the speech itself. Like most throne speeches, especially right after an election, big rehash of everything that they promised in their platform. It's very funny to hear the King of England talk about the average family saving $840 through a middle-class tax cut.
Or talked about eliminating GST on homes for homes between 1 million and 1.5 million. Yeah,
he has no sense what that amount of money is.
Well, that's not the part that struck. I was watching the prep for this, and what maybe worse, like there's probably a lot of this that he's probably not well briefed on or knows a huge amount about.
Doesn't have to be. Not his job.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Like it's reading a prepared speech, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. There's a weird aspect on that like I bet the King of Canada could not actually describe what the promise, annoyingly, to protect supply management would means in practice. Where, I don't know how much Mary Simons knows, but she, could probably string together an answer if asked about any point in there. So, just an interesting aspect on that.
Yeah, so that was all in there. Section on building a stronger Canada. Like, they did promise a few bills that are coming forward, and Carney's also talked about some of these already, right? The bill is going to come forward to remove all federal trade and labor mobility barriers between provinces by July 1st. We're going to get a bill to enhance security at the borders.
Create a major federal project office.
Mm-hmm.
That one's coming soon in legislation. So cool, we get to have the Bill 15 fight again.
No, a major federal project office is a different thing. That's a stand. That's not all projects just go through cabinet if they want them to pass.
Yeah, but like in the story we'll link in here about an upfront approval for the projects in national interest, they are planning in that legislation to basically create a designation for projects that are we will approve this, and now we're going to figure out how. So yeah, we will get the Bill 15 fight again, or for if anyone's from Ontario, the Bill 5 fight, because they're doing something similar-ish right now. That's also causing some controversy there.
It's got a few other things too that's also making people mad, like special economic zones that are never that popular. Well, except by
the results
business
often
owners.
Are.
Not by people who work in them and get exploited. But we don't need to debate the Ontario stuff right now. The government's also going to do its Build Canada Homes organization to accelerate affordable housing. What I noticed is during the election, it sounded like Build Canada Homes was going to be a public sector developer that would, on behalf of the government, build them. Now it sounds like it's just going to be BC Builds or Canada Builds, where it just gives grants and financing to nonprofit developers, which is a much slower process because you have to have applications and rely on third parties to exist and have capacity and ability to move those projects forward.
Well, it wasn't just sounds like it. The actual text in the platform was, through Build Canada Homes, Canada will act as a developer to build affordable housing at scale on public lands.
That didn't make it to the throne speech. That language has disappeared, frankly.
Which is also going to be somewhat interesting, how that interfaces with the proposal that I think got mentioned in the throne speech to do modular housing on there, which there have been so many attempts at starting modular housing companies that all fail or do not have the impact that the people starting them hope, because turns out creating a housing factory is like very capital intensive, and the housing market or development market's pretty cyclical, so it's pretty good way to end up with the company going bankrupt as soon as the market softens on that, and they can't pay for all their capital works on that. So basically, I think the way to actually, what you would need it is you basically need a buyer of last resort or a purchase guarantee set up for it, where you pre-commit to buying a certain amount of something.
Which all works really well if you're the government and you're just committed to building 100,000 homes a year or whatever.
Yeah, so like for the people who remember Operation Warp Speed, one of the things that made that work was that the government committed ahead of time to buy a bunch of whatever vaccine got produced, before that actually got done, so that the companies would actually have the incentive to invest in it on there. That's also been part of the problem holding up getting the artillery ammunition that was announced like 2 years ago to help Ukraine, and that has not been rolling through, is that understandably, if you want a company to go through a lot of capital expenditures to create the capacity to do it, they want to make sure that that's not all going to go to waste if peace breaks out in a year or so, which, let's all hope for peace, but you do kind of want the government to be there saying, yeah, we'll make sure you guys aren't going to go bankrupt if you do the thing we want you to do.
That military-industrial complex really showing itself. But yeah, a housing-industrial complex is great and would be great if we do it.
Basically, if you, as the government, you want something to happen, purchase guarantees should probably be a significant part of the policy tool on that.
The other part of their housing that made it into here is the promise to cut development charges in half for multi-unit housing. And so we'll see how quickly and easily that rolls out, because cities don't like that one unless they have some way to fund their operations in the interim that's not, doubling property taxes overnight. Beyond that, in the safety and security thing, I mentioned the additional border legislation. They want powers for Canadian Border Service agents to examine export goods to try to stop fentanyl. I guess this is kind of leaning on the, here's things we'll do to make Trump happy, I guess. Given there's not much fentanyl going from Canada to the US, this feels like building a security state for nothing, or at least expanding the security state.
They're having a few busts in the last couple months of like major labs. I think quite a few in BC. Quite a few of those were in BC. So yeah, even if the international smuggling part's not a huge aspect, there's definitely work to be done on that front.
They're also going to hire more cops and, fund the military, as has been talked about, including an announcement to join Rearm Europe. What is that, Scott?
Yeah, this is actually the one thing that stood out from reading the throne speech that wasn't in the platform. Basically, it's the program the Europeans are embarking on, joint venture between a bunch of the countries there in order to basically re-equip and rearm their various armed forces on there. There's a lot of work to be done on that front, particularly because a lot of the capabilities needed to fight a major conflict with a near-peer adversary has not had a lot of investment in that in the last couple decades. And that becomes a real challenge with, Russia engaged in a war of territorial expansion, and by all indications would be happy not to just stop at Ukraine and carry on after that. I don't know the specifics of everything involved, but my understanding is that it's basically air, land, and sea, significant defense programs across those various domains, probably space too. And by joining that, there's both advantages in terms of getting on board with next generation capability programs, as well as probably benefits for Canadian industry on that too.
Yeah, and he says he wants to get us involved in this program by July 1st. So good, diversifies our stuff. I know it'd be interesting to see how that plays out, because I know the Koreans have been making a pretty big play for being a major supplier to Canada as we increase our defense spending and re-equip. And the only other thing I saw on defense spending recently was the random comment from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte that he expects everyone to approve a goal of 5% GDP for defense spending.
5 seems high.
That's wild. That's just
basically, I think Poland is probably the only one meeting it right now.
Yeah.
And that's because they're the ones that are most concerned about Russia, and that isn't, tiny Baltic states that just don't have the economic size to sustain a force that can actually deter Russia.
I think Trump wants 5%. Everyone else is
well, he's been all over
more?
The place. So.
Oh yeah, he's not consistent. He's the only one who's probably come out with that number. Anyway, back to the throne speech. There's a little bit more on the safety and security stuff. Firearms changes, including some of those ones we mentioned in our platform analysis that I think already exist.
They already exist. There's nothing. Not only is there not a new announcement here, there wouldn't even be a new law, because that is already the law.
And bail reforms that are kind of perpetually talked about, making it harder.
Which are overdue, and they should actually get around to doing it rather than, like you said, perpetually talking about it.
On the United Canada section, which I don't know how they named these, they protecting a lot of things, including supply management, protecting 30% of land and water by 2030 with new national parks. That meets a commitment we've made. Some other things from the platform from the Liberals, doubling the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program from $5 to $10 billion, restoring balance to immigration by capping the total number of temporary foreign workers and international students to under 5% of population by 2027, which is all sure. And then finally, bringing the operating budget growth down from what they peg at 9% annually to 2% annually, and balancing our budget within 3 years, while maintaining our transfers to the provinces, because we don't want them to get mad. It doesn't say increasing transfers to meet inflation, but I guess they have escalators built in.
A lot of them do, yeah.
So will be interesting to see how they actually bring the budget down, because their promise is what every new government does, and it's efficiencies and cutting waste, maintaining all our programs. But the reason budgets go up 8 or 9% at municipalities is the same reason it does federally, is you have a mix of inflation and population growth. And once you add a couple of new big programs like dental care and pharma in there, 9% a year actually seems like a reasonable amount to be growing the budget.
Well, I mean, just you can explain why it grew over the last few years doesn't necessarily make it a sustainable path, because population growth is about 1.5-2%, somewhere in there. Per capita GDP growth, that or lower, it doesn't. You can't just keep growing the spending by more than the population and the economy are growing long term and have it be sustainable.
I mean, unless you increase taxes, which we haven't meaningfully done in quite a while. We had major cuts in the 90s and then major tax cuts under Harper, and we're still kind of unable to afford our society because of that.
And that only buys you time, but even if you increase taxes, if the economy is not growing at 9%, you can't continually grow the spending at 9% and have that be long-term sustainable. It just pushes that point of crisis a little further out. But if you can't spend more than the economy is generating over the long term. And if one line's going up faster than the other, they will eventually cross.
But realistically, cutting operating budget growth to under 2% is austerity. It means things will
It's still
tighten.
growing. Austerity would be going negative on the growth.
If our population plus inflation is over 2%, that means our operating budget is growing less than it needs to keep up.
So are we talking real or nominal numbers here for growth?
Real. I'm assuming he's talking.
Yeah, well, if it's real, then it's already accounted for inflation.
He's not going to magic that money away, though. So we'll have to see when the budget comes in the fall. So yeah, overall, throne speech, unsurprisingly, a rehash of the platform. I was happy to see more specifics in here than a lot of throne speeches we've looked at in recent years. I'll grant that.
I mean, sure, but a lot of this is just rehashing what they'd already announced. In fact, I think the Rearm Europe was the only one we found that wasn't a previous announcement. If they wanted more specifics, I would have liked to see new stuff or elaboration beyond what was in the platform. Not that necessarily would be the sort of thing that would end up in a throne speech, but I don't know. I don't feel like giving them a lot of credit for just updating the copy on the same bullet points they'd previously talked about.
At least it's a new prime minister, so he's not patting himself on the back
That is good, because that got annoying as hell.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.